Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, she, he, and this is Literally Graphic. Today we are flipping through Amazon's Abolitionists and Activists, a graphic history of women's fight for their rights by Mikki Kendall and A.D. Amico, published by 10 Speed Press, an imprint of Random House, in 2019. And, as this is off my Black Comics TBR, it is time to recommend another Black creator, but this time with a bit of a twist, I guess, because as I put this video together, we are right on the cusp of Caribathon, a really great readathon that has been organized for a number of years by Comfy Cozy Up and Run Right Reads, two creators I have highlighted previously, but cannot recommend enough. This year's readathon is running from June 8th to 18th, and links in the description to their announcement videos. Caribathon has definitely been a catalyst in my own life to pick up more books by Caribbean authors, and I have certainly not regretted it. Clicking over to Mikki Kendall's website, her About section reads, quote, "A writer, diversity consultant, and occasional feminist, she has appeared on a wide array of notable news platforms where she discusses race, feminism, police violence, tech, and pop culture at institutions and universities across the country. She is the author of New York Times best-selling Hood Feminism. Her essays can be found at Time, the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Essence, Vogue, the Boston Globe, NBC, and a host of other sites." End quote. Moving along to A.D. Amico's portfolio about page, quote, "A queer illustrator living in Detroit, Michigan, who loves all things tea, historical fiction, fantasy, and horror. D. Amico enjoys writing and illustrating comics, which they find to be an incredibly powerful vehicle for storytelling. Their main medium of choice is digital, but they also very much love using watercolor and ink wash." End quote. Keywords that came to mind reading this book: nonfiction, simulation, classroom, organization, protest, direct action, power, intersectional, and international. The synopsis over on Goodreads is, quote, "The ongoing struggle for women's rights has spanned human history, touching nearly every culture on Earth, and encompassed a wide range of issues such as the right to vote, work, get an education, own property, exercise bodily autonomy, and beyond." Amazon's Abolitionists and Activists is a fun and fascinating graphic novel style primer that covers the key figures and events that have advanced women's rights from antiquity to the modern era. In addition, this compelling book illuminates the stories of notable women throughout history, from queens and freedom fighters to warriors and spies, and the progressive movements led by women that have shaped history, including abolition, suffrage, labor, civil rights, LGBTQ liberation, reproductive rights, and more. Examine where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Amazon Abolitionists and Activists is an indispensable resource for people of all genders interested in the fight for a more liberated future. End quote. A book packed full of information, it certainly covers a vast swath of time and space, much to the frustration of some reviewers, although I feel like it falls pretty squarely into a fairly typical overview-style book aimed at the younger set. Similarly, the somewhat random premise of a classroom being walked through a simulation of history, accompanied by what I assume to be an AI, reminds me of several middle-grade graphic novels similarly focused on history. That said, fully aware that it is much easier to be an armchair critic than to actually create things, I do feel we could have spent less time trying to cover a million individuals and put more emphasis on people working together in groups and movements. Not to say there was none of that covered, but I am more than a little tired of the parade of so-called great men of history, and turning it around to only include women isn't more than a few points of improvement. Similarly, while it is fairly standard, I feel like it would have been nice if the idea of non-cisgendered people and or disabled women was a bit more integrated throughout, rather than left for the final modern act. That said, one of the main premises of the book is to disabuse the reader of the idea that the struggle for women's rights is only a recent and or so-called white thing, or even a thing that has developed in a linear fashion. Kendall instead works to show the reader how the rights of women have been more or less realized throughout time and around the globe in many cultures. This, I agree, is an excellent and important motive. Kendall also does an excellent job job pointing to times and people in history that had been working for one worthy cause, such as the rights of women, while still being racist, for example. Although I do feel like the word choice leans a bit towards the glass half full end of things, although I might also just be overly jaded by the apparent trajectory of bodily autonomy in the States right now. Anyway, circling back, this sort of nuance does bring the lack of outright trans and disabled inclusion until the very end into more striking contrast. But perhaps I am asking too much. Otherwise, the art is very good, although I would note that I found it strangely hard to figure out which parts were two-page spreads and which were not. From time to time, the deliberate international focus was extremely refreshing and brought a lot more racial diversity into things than I find is average in these sorts of books, although I am unconvinced that, of all things, we needed to recreate anti-Japanese posters directly on the page. To conclude, I think this book achieves its aims of being a jumping-off point to reconsidering history. I certainly would have appreciated being exposed to this level of nuance earlier in my life, even if in my elderly 30s, I wish it went a tad bit further. 4 out of 5 stars. Bye y'all, keep reading and organized to end capitalist oppression. And as always, Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.